Welcome to NibblePop Stories. Today, let me tell you the story of The Great Gatsby, a novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Back in his younger days, Nick Carraway gets a piece of advice from his father that sticks with him. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, just remember that not everyone has had the advantages you have had. This advice makes Nick more reserved in his judgments, turning him into a confidant for many. In college, people even think he is a politician because he knows so many secrets. Most of these confessions are uninvited, and sometimes Nick pretends to be asleep or busy to avoid them. So, who is Nick Carraway? Nick was born in 1892 in Minnesota into a wealthy family. His granduncle starts their hardware business in 1851. Nick goes to Yale and serves in France during the Great War in 1917. The experience leaves him feeling restless, and the Midwest no longer feels like home. In the spring of 1922, Nick moves east, funded by his father for a year. He finds a small bungalow in West Egg, Long Island. There he can live while working in the city. That summer, life feels new, and Nick keeps busy reading about banking and investments. Long Island is split into two parts, East Egg and West Egg, about 20 miles outside New York. West Egg is less fashionable than East Egg. The two are separated by a bay. Nick's house is modest, sandwiched between two grand mansions, one of which belongs to Gatsby. Across the bay are the glittering white palaces of East Egg. Nick's story begins with an invitation to dine with Tom and Daisy Buchanan. Daisy is Nick's cousin. She is flirty, funny, and engaging. Tom, her husband, is an old college acquaintance of Nick, a powerful man with an arrogant manner. Their house is grand, and Nick is struck by its abundance compared to his modest home. Inside, Daisy greets Nick warmly, and he meets Jordan Baker, Daisy's friend and a famous golfer. When Daisy learns that Nick has just moved to West Egg, she asks if he knows Gatsby. Before Nick can reply, dinner is announced. The dinner is interrupted by a phone call, which Tom rushes out to take. Daisy follows him, and after a while, Nick and Jordan hear them having a heated conversation. Jordan tells Nick that Tom has a lady friend in New York and Daisy knows about it. The phone keeps ringing again and again. As the evening draws to a close, the tension between Daisy and Tom is palpable, revealing their troubled marriage. Driving back to West Egg, Nick feels disgusted by the empty lives of the Buchanans. That night, as he sits outside his house, he sees his neighbor come out of his mansion. It is Gatsby, standing alone and looking out across the bay, reaching his hands out across the water, trembling slightly. Nick looks across the bay but sees nothing except for a single green light at the end of a dock. There is a grey abandoned area near the train tracks between West Egg and New York City where the city's ashes are dumped. The ashes cover everything, including the men who live there. Nick calls it the Valley of Ashes. Overlooking this desolate zone is an old billboard put up by Dr. T. J. Eckelberg, an eye doctor from Queens. The billboard is in a sorry state, but it has a pair of haunting, unblinking eyes behind huge yellow eyeglasses. There is no face or nose, just big eyes looking out over the valley. One day, Tom and Nick take a train to New York. When they stop at the bridge in the Valley of Ashes, Tom grabs Nick and forces him off the train. They are going to meet Tom's mistress, Myrtle. You know, the frequent caller at the Buchanan's dinner party. Tom leads Nick to George Wilson's auto garage. George is Myrtle's weak and lifeless husband. Myrtle strikes Nick as vibrant and oddly sensuous. Tom talks with Wilson about selling a car. When Wilson goes to get some chairs, Tom whispers to Myrtle to meet them later at the train station. Nick and Myrtle call up some friends for a party. They get drunk. Among the friends are Myrtle's sister Catherine and a photographer named Chester McKee. The conversation eventually turns to Nick's neighbor, Gatsby. Catherine says she is afraid of Gatsby because she has heard he is related to the German Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm. And everyone agrees Gatsby is involved in some shady business. As Myrtle gets more drunk, she gets louder. After Tom gives her a puppy as a gift, she starts talking about Daisy. Tom warns her not to use Daisy's name, but she starts teasing him by repeatedly calling out, "Daisy, Daisy, Daisy." Tom punches her in the nose, breaking it. The party ends, and Nick takes the train home alone. Every Saturday night, Gatsby throws a huge, lavish party at his mansion. Eventually, Nick gets an invitation. At the party, he feels out of place and he notices that most of the guests were not invited. The main topic of conversation is all the rumors about Gatsby. Nick hears that Gatsby is a German spy, an Oxford graduate, and someone even claims that Gatsby had once killed a man. Nick runs into Jordan Baker at the party. While hanging out with her, he takes in all the amazing luxuries: a live orchestra, a bounty of food and imported fruits, and endless reserves of alcohol. Nick and Jordan decide to find their mysterious host and wander into Gatsby's library. There, they meet a short, somewhat drunk man whom Nick calls Owl Eyes because of his owl-like glasses. Owl Eyes is amazed that Gatsby's books are real, even though they have never been read. Later, as Nick and Jordan sit outside watching the party, Nick starts a conversation with the man sitting next to him. The man thinks Nick looks familiar, and they realize they might have crossed paths during World War I. The man introduces himself as Jay Gatsby. Gatsby has a dazzling smile and calls everyone old sport. Nick finds Gatsby interesting because he stays apart from the party, as if he enjoys watching the spectacle more than joining in. The party continues. At some point, a butler asks Jordan to come meet with Gatsby. When she returns, she is excited and tells Nick she has heard the most amazing thing. Finally, the night ends. Gatsby has to take a business call from Philadelphia, and Nick leaves the party. On his way home, he sees a crowd around an automobile accident. A drunk man has driven his new car into a ditch with owl eyes in the passenger seat. The car is missing a tire, but the driver still tries to reverse it out of the ditch. That summer, Nick starts dating Jordan Baker. Even though he is attracted to her, he does not really like her because she is dishonest and even cheats at golf. One day, Nick sees some drunk women on Gatsby's lawn talking about who Gatsby really is, throwing around all the usual rumors. One of them says Gatsby is a bootlegger. It means he is involved in the illegal import, distribution, and sale of alcohol. Remember, from 1920 to 1933, the US prohibited the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages. Another day, Gatsby shows up at Nick's place and takes him on a trip to the city for lunch. They ride in Gatsby's huge cream-colored car. While driving, Gatsby tells Nick about his past. He claims to be the son of wealthy parents from San Francisco, to have graduated from Oxford, been a noted jewel collector in Europe, and a decorated war hero. Nick doesn't believe a word until Gatsby shows him a war medal and hints that Nick will hear a very sad story about him later in the day. Gatsby speeds and gets pulled over, but shows the cop a little card. The officer apologizes and lets him go. For lunch, they meet Gatsby's business partner, Meyer Wolfsheim. Wolfsheim tells Nick that Gatsby is a man of fine breeding. Gatsby mentions that Wolfsheim fixed the 1919 World Series, which was the championship series in Major League Baseball between the Chicago White Sox and the Cincinnati Reds. Nick starts to think Gatsby might be involved in organized crime. As they leave the restaurant, Nick sees Tom Buchanan and introduces him to Gatsby. Gatsby looks embarrassed and leaves without saying goodbye. After lunch, Nick meets Jordan at the Plaza Hotel. She tells him that Gatsby had a passionate romance with Daisy Fay, who is now Daisy Buchanan. During the war, when Daisy was not yet 20, Gatsby met her while stationed in Louisville, and they fell in love. Daisy's family stopped her from marrying Gatsby, and Gatsby was shipped off to war. A year later, Daisy married Tom Buchanan, a wealthy man from Chicago. The night before her wedding, Daisy got a letter from Gatsby. She had a meltdown, got drunk, and threw away Tom's wedding gift. But the marriage went on. Daisy and Tom started their life together, had a kid, went to France, moved to Chicago, and finally ended up in New York. 5 years later, Gatsby reappeared and bought his house in West Egg so Daisy would be just across the bay. Jordan then shares the amazing thing Gatsby told her. Gatsby wants Nick to invite Daisy over to his house for tea so Gatsby can show up and Daisy will have to see him even if she doesn't want to. Nick realizes that Gatsby throws all these parties hoping Daisy might just walk in one night. Nick is not sure about what to do. After coming back from the city, Nick runs into Gatsby late at night on his front lawn. Gatsby seems nervous and asks if Nick wants to take a swim in his pool. Nick realizes that Gatsby is trying to convince him to set up the meeting with Daisy. Nick agrees to do it. Then Gatsby offers Nick a chance to join an illegal business venture. Nick is offended by Gatsby trying to buy him off, but continues to talk about the plans for meeting Daisy. On the day of the meeting, Gatsby looks nervous. Even though it's raining, he sends a man to cut Nick's grass and fills Nick's house with flowers. Gatsby disappears just as Daisy arrives. When Gatsby shows up at Nick's front door, he looks pale as a ghost. Daisy is happy to see Gatsby. They start off treating each other formally, and Gatsby's nerves almost get the best of him. Nick leaves them alone for half an hour. When he comes back, he finds them happy. Gatsby then takes them on a tour of his mansion. In his bedroom, Gatsby talks about staring at the green light on Daisy's dock. Daisy breaks down crying while looking through Gatsby's collection of luxurious English shirts. Next, Gatsby gets Evie Klipspringer to play the piano for them. Gatsby holds Daisy's hand and he whispers something to him that seems to stir his emotions. Nick senses that they no longer realize he is there. Nick leaves them and walks out alone into the rain. Nick finds out the truth behind the rumors and Gatsby's own stories. Gatsby was born James Gatz on a farm in North Dakota around 1900. At 17, he changes his name to Jay Gatsby and spends over a year clamming and fishing on the south shore of Lake Superior. He attends St. Olaf College in southern Minnesota, but drops out after 2 weeks. He meets Dan Cody, a 50-year-old multimillionaire expert in mining and precious metals, and becomes his assistant for 5 years on Cody's boat, the Ptolemy. When Cody dies, he leaves Gatsby $25,000, but Gatsby never gets it due to a legal technicality. After that, Gatsby dedicates himself to becoming rich and successful. For a few weeks, Nick doesn't see Gatsby. Then, one afternoon, Gatsby shows up at Nick's house. A few moments later, Tom Buchanan also shows up unexpectedly with some friends. Gatsby tells Tom he knows his wife and invites Tom and his friends to stay for dinner. They decline but invite Gatsby to dinner instead. Gatsby does not realize that the invitation was just to be polite. He accepts. The next Saturday night, Tom and Daisy come to a party at Gatsby's. Nick finds the party particularly unpleasant. Tom is full of disdain, and even though Daisy and Gatsby dance together gracefully, she seems to have a bad time. At one point, they sneak off to the garden. As Tom and Daisy leave, Tom says he suspects Gatsby's fortune comes from bootlegging. Nick denies this. Daisy says Gatsby made his money from drug stores he built himself. After the party, Gatsby is depressed. He suspects Daisy didn't enjoy the party and doesn't understand how deeply he feels for her. Nick reminds him that the past cannot be repeated, but Gatsby disagrees. He says that he will restore everything to the way it was before. After this party, Gatsby's house gets much quieter and his parties stop. Nick visits and learns that Gatsby ended the parties because he does not need them anymore to attract Daisy. He also fired all his servants because Daisy thought they might gossip about their relationship because she now visits often in the afternoons. He replaced them with some of Wolfsheim's men. On the hottest day of the summer, Daisy invites Nick and Gatsby to lunch with her, Tom, and Jordan. While Tom is out of the room, Daisy kisses Gatsby and says she loves him. The lunch is awkward, partly because of the intense heat. At one point, Daisy asks what they should do with the rest of the day and the next 30 years of their lives. She suddenly cries out that she wants them all to go to the city. Daisy and Gatsby lock eyes, and Tom can see that they are in love. He suddenly agrees that they should all go to the city. Tom insists on driving Gatsby's big yellow car. Gatsby and Daisy travel alone in Tom's coupe, while Tom drives Nick and Jordan. During the drive, Tom realizes that Nick and Jordan already know about the affair. Gatsby's car is low on gas, so Tom pulls into Wilson's garage in the Valley of Ashes. Remember Wilson and Myrtle? By this time, Wilson has discovered Myrtle's affair but hasn't figured out that it is with Tom. Wilson declares that they are moving out west. While they talk, Nick notices the haunting eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg in the distance. He also spots Myrtle staring down from the windows above the garage at Jordan. Myrtle makes a mistake and thinks that it is Daisy. In the city, the group takes a suite at the Plaza Hotel near Central Park. Tom is in a bad mood because he feels his wife and his mistress are slipping from his control. He challenges Gatsby's claim of being an Oxford man. When Gatsby successfully answers, Tom asks what kind of split Gatsby is trying to cause between Tom and his wife. Daisy doesn't deny the affair, but tries unsuccessfully to quiet Tom. Gatsby says Daisy never loved Tom. Tom protests, but Daisy says it is true. Yet, when Tom asks her to think about their history together, Daisy admits she did love Tom in the past, even if she also loved Gatsby. Gatsby is stunned. Tom then reveals that Gatsby is involved in organized crime like bootlegging. This revelation terrifies Daisy. She breaks down and begs Tom to leave and go home. Tom is satisfied. He wants to flaunt his triumph over Gatsby. He tells Daisy to go back with Gatsby, who won't bother her anymore, realizing his presumptuous flirtation is over. They leave, and the other three soon follow in Tom's blue coupe. As they drive back from the city, the trio comes upon an accident at Wilson's garage. Tom's excitement turns to horror when he sees Myrtle lying dead, the victim of a hit and run by a speeding yellow car. It seems she ran out into the road almost like she expected it to stop. She thought Tom was driving it because earlier that day she saw Tom driving Gatsby's yellow car while heading to New York. On the drive home, Tom breaks down in tears, knowing it was Gatsby who hit Myrtle. It's late when they arrive at the Buchanan mansion. Tom orders Nick a taxi. As Nick waits outside, he sees Gatsby hiding in the bushes. Gatsby tells him that Daisy was driving the car and that he tried to stop the accident but was too late. He says he'll take responsibility for it. He is less concerned about Myrtle and more worried that Tom will harm Daisy. He asks Nick to check through the window to see if she is all right. Nick looks through the window and sees Tom and Daisy sitting together, reconciled. They're not exactly happy, Nick thinks, but not exactly unhappy either. Nick tells Gatsby everything is quiet, but Gatsby still refuses to leave. Nick leaves him, watching over nothing. Nick can't sleep that night. The next morning, he visits Gatsby for breakfast. Gatsby tells Nick that Daisy never came outside the previous night, but he rejects Nick's advice to forget Daisy and leave Long Island. He still thinks Daisy is about to change her mind. Gatsby thinks about the early days of his relationship with Daisy. He was captivated by her wealth, her enormous house, and the fact that other men loved her. To be with her, he let her believe he was of the same class. One night they slept together, and he felt as if he had married her. Then he left for the war. Daisy waited for a while, but eventually married Tom. After breakfast, Gatsby and Nick walk together. The gardener tells Gatsby he is going to drain the pool, but Gatsby tells him to wait. He hasn't used it all summer and would like to. Nick has to go to work and promises to call around noon. Gatsby says he supposes Daisy will call too. On his way out, Nick tells Gatsby he is worth more than all of them put together. Gatsby smiles broadly. Here is some backstory. What happened at Wilson's garage after Myrtle's death? Wilson spends all night talking to Michaelis, a Greek immigrant who owns a coffee shop next to the ash heaps, and he is Wilson's friend. Wilson reveals to Michaelis that Myrtle had a lover, and he suspects the man driving the car was her lover because she ran out to meet it. He tells Michaelis how he confronted her about sinning in the eyes of God. Near dawn, Wilson, staring into the eyes of T.J. Eckelberg, mentions God. He says he has a way of finding out who was driving the car, and later that morning he disappears from the garage. At 2 o'clock, Gatsby goes for a swim. He leaves instructions that he should be notified if any phone calls come in. He is sure Daisy will call any time soon. Later that afternoon, Nick and some of Wolfsheim's men at Gatsby's house find Gatsby shot dead in his pool. Wilson's dead body is close by, lying in the grass. It is clear that Wilson shot Gatsby and then himself. Nick arranges Gatsby's funeral and tries to contact Daisy, but she and Tom have left town. He then reaches out to Wolfsheim, who refuses to come to the funeral. Finally, Gatsby's father shows up a few days later. He looks old, is dressed in cheap clothes, and is devastated by his son's death. He believed that Gatsby was destined for great things. He asks Nick about his relationship with Gatsby, and Nick says they were close friends. That night, Klipspringer calls. Remember him? The guy who played the piano when Daisy first visited Gatsby's mansion? Nick tells him about the funeral, but Klipspringer says he can't attend because he has a picnic in Greenwich. He then asks Nick to send him a pair of tennis shoes he left at Gatsby's mansion. Gatsby's memorial is held at the house, but nobody shows up. The sad little procession moves to the cemetery, where only one other guest turns up, Owl Eyes, the drunk guy from the library. After Gatsby's death, Nick finds the East haunting. He goes to Jordan Baker's house to set things straight with her. She tells him she is engaged to another man. Later in October, Nick runs into Tom Buchanan in New York. He refuses to shake Tom's hand and learns that Tom told George Wilson that Gatsby ran over Myrtle. He doesn't tell Tom that Daisy was driving. Nick decides to return west. On his last night in West Egg before moving back to Minnesota, Nick walks down to Gatsby's beach and looks out at the blinking green light. He wonders how the first settlers to America must have felt staring at the new continent, and imagines Gatsby's similar wonder when he realized that the tiny blinking green light across the bay belonged to Daisy Buchanan. So this is the story of the Great Gatsby. Did you find this useful? Then please subscribe and share with your friends. This is Monami Mukherjee signing off. Good night.